Donald Trump set to double down on his hardline approach to fighting ISIS in a foreign policy speech today. This coming as Trump's running mate defends the Republican nominee's recent remarks, holding President Obama responsible for the rise of ISIS, although Trump claimed that he was being sarcastic.
Well, he was making a very serious point. And look, it's so important.
Why did he say he was being sarcastic?
Yeah, well, he was making a very serious point. Donald Trump has a way of talking that gets people's attention, and it's drawn attention to a very important issue. There was a time when a Democrat president knew where the buck stopped in the White House, and the responsibility for the failed policies in the Middle East that created the environment where ISIS developed belongs to President Barack Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
Let's bring in London Center for Policy Research Senior Fellow Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer is here this morning. Good to have you, Colonel.
Morning, Sandra. Thank you for having me. Good to be on.
All right, so what do you expect out of Donald Trump today?
Well, I think he's going to continue with this theme. And look, let me be honest here with your audience. He is factually correct. President Obama, working with members of the intelligence community, had put together essentially an arms deal to help arm the precursor elements of ISIS. So what he's saying is actually factually correct. And I think people have to understand that with the added withdrawal of U.S. forces from Iraq, as Mike Pence said, as Governor Pence said, created the conditions for this. So I think he is factually correct. I think he has to be more clear in how he presents facts. But I think moving forward with this theme is one that's going to be effective by the fact that what he has to do is draw a very bright line between what he would do with the people he'd bring in and what President Obama and Hillary Clinton has done to create the chaos we now see.
Colonel, we still know it's a mystery who his foreign policy team is and will be. Do you think it's important that he reveals that?
I think it's one of the things he must do because, as I mentioned, he's got to draw a very bright line between what has happened, what we see happening, and what he would project forward. And I think the clearest way to do that is bring in the foreign policy experts, which, first off, he can trust, and secondly, which have been effective. One of the things I keep talking about both publicly and privately here in Washington with people I advise is, look, let's look at how we won wars, not at how we lost them. And I think that's what we have to look at is let's not go with the losing team right now that we see in place. Let's find those people who would come in with fresh ideas, who have actually prevailed in the days that they were in government, and do something different. And I think it's very critical he move forward with this idea.
Well, I think we should be really, this is Harlan Hill here, I think we should be really clear. I mean, Barack Obama created a power vacuum in Iraq. He armed fighters that became ISIS fighters, and then he underestimated the rise of ISIS once it was clear that they were a threat, calling them the JV team, calling threats of international terrorism similar to slip and falls in your bathtub. He has clearly underestimated the threat of international terrorism for quite a long time. What do we need to see out of Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump at this point to signal that we're changing course?
Well, I think one of the things you're going to see is Mike Flynn, just full disclosure, he's a friend of mine, but he's also advising Donald Trump, did a book called Field to Fight. Field to Fight, where he talks about the terrorism policy. He's been advising Donald Trump on some of this. Mike Flynn has been observing some of the failings of both sides. I mean, he's been involved as an Obama official during the time that things went off the rails. So I think the idea here is to look at the components which went wrong. Look at those individual and collective failures of this administration and come up with a clear plan on how you're going to do that. I'd like to see Donald Trump come out with a very clear path forward today in his speech.
All right. Well, Colonel Shaffer, Donald Trump is also expected to expand his immigration proposal, calling for the U.S. to stop issuing visas in any case where it cannot adequately vet applicants. What do you make of this proposal?
I think it's reasonable. Again, the two jobs of the federal government is provide for the common defense and common good. And it's not for us to help the world find places for immigrants or those who have been displaced. I think we should. I think it's in our nature to do so. But I think the first job is to protect the American people. And if you look at the lessons, Sandra, of Europe, of what has happened with Germany and other places where unmitigated people just came washing in. There was all sorts of second and third order effects, some tragic where people were killed. So I think it's in our interest to actually take a step back, look at how the European counter-terror policies have failed, how their immigration policies have failed, and correct them here before we have the same problems. I think it's the most prudent thing to do.
And, Tony, one thing that, Colonel, that it's Dagan McDowell that we haven't even mentioned yet, and that is the role of Iran and the deal that we have cut with Iran, and I guess the precarious position that leaves the United States in, ceding so much power and money to a state sponsor of terrorism.
Right. Well, two problems with that. First, the Saudi allies, and I'm not defending the Saudi Arabians, feel that they're now being left out, and I think we've done damage with those we've allied ourselves with. Secondly, by paying all this money to them, they've now reinvigorated not necessarily their nuclear program, the Iranian program, but the North Korean program. All the money we gave the Iranians have ended up with the North Koreans, and we all know how crazy they are. So we have to look at, again, the second and third order effects of our action. And, of course, the most important is the Iranians now are trying to increase their influence through the region, creating all sorts of havoc through Hezbollah, through the IRGC. So, again, we have a deal in place which has done absolutely nothing to help create security, stability for us or our allies. So, again, what is the benefit of entering into a deal which is all bad? And I think it's one of those things that President Obama has been more worried about his legacy, about trying to get some sort of deal on the table, rather than looking at what long-term is going to be the consequences of a very bad decision, one which I think we're going to pay a lot of cost for down the road.
All right, and there's also this new report out, Colonel, that says ISIS is instructing its franchises to kill Christians. Right. What should be done to protect Christians, and do you see Trump's approach as helping this at all?
I think being on the offensive, getting ISIS off its game is the first thing to do. Right now, in military terms, ISIS maintains the initiative. We have to stop that. And then the harder we can go back at them, the more we can protect everyone, to include Christians. Look, I've read the article on this, and I have no doubt that they're targeting Christians, especially in Africa. I think what we have to understand is we have to educate the Christian community. I've been trying to, one of the Christian broadcast networks has had me on talking about this several times, about the fact that missionaries and others are very much at risk overseas. They have to accept that as ground truth. With that said, we must do much more to go after ISIS as a global entity, which, by the way, the White House has yet to authorize DOD to go after ISIS globally. We're doing kind of this patchwork thing all over. I think we have to recognize ISIS is now a global threat, as you point out. ISIS is now giving direction to its franchises globally. Let's accept the fact that that's what they're doing and go after them hard and try to defeat them.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, always good to get your perspective. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for having me.